guides are done, the play count is dropping, and I've played a campaign as every single faction in the game, so the time has come to create the sequel to the most successful video the channel has ever seen and rank every single Warhammer 3 race from worst to best. With 8 factions to choose from, Warhammer 3 is one of the most diverse games we've seen on launch, and each one has a unique set of mechanics that stand them apart from the rest. But this does leave the question, which one is the best? Who has the most powerful mechanics, the best location on the map, the strongest army, and who is the best faction in Total War Warhammer 3? Just before we find out though, I'd like to let you know that all of this list is based on my personal experiences and opinions. If you disagree, that's okay. Let's just keep it civil in the comments and you can let me know your ranking as well. Also, pretty much all the factions in Warhammer 3 are pretty powerful, so these rankings are close for the most part. And just before we get started, I'd like to briefly thank Yours App, who partnered with me for this video. Yours App is a well-being app focused on tailoring the experience to you to help with your everyday life with treatments that are specific to you and your personal issues. For example, a couple of things I personally struggle with are general anxiety, which stops me from sleeping and can affect my concentration when I need to get things done, especially when I'm under time pressure like I often am making YouTube videos. There are several things in the app that help with this, such as sleep stories, sounds, and music to help you drift off to sleep or get in the zone to focus on the task at hand. I've been listening to some of their music while editing videos, and I can honestly say it's helped me stay focused and get work done quicker and with less stress. On top of this, there is also a ton of other great features like videos to help you understand your own thoughts and feelings, guided meditation, and yoga tutorials if you are so interested in those sorts of things. As part of our partnership, Yours App are offering you 60% off a yearly plan if you use my link in the description or code Colonel at checkout. That brings the price down to just $4 a month, so it's a really great deal and brilliant value for everything that is included in the app. You can also go for the monthly plan if you want to try it before you commit to a full year, and the same code Colonel will get you 20% off, making it $8 a month. Huge thanks again to Yours App for partnering with the channel, and now let's get into the ranking. Coming in 8th place, we have Papa Plague himself, it's NURGLE. It truly saddens me to see my boys so low, but in their current state, they are truly the weakest faction in the game. First of all, his unconventional campaign. His economy is the weakest in the game, as you can struggle to maintain even one full stack with a late game empire, since you have no real moneymaker buildings. He also isn't the best at sacking and raiding to make money, at least early on, since his armies are pretty slow to replenish to balance out his weird recruitment. Speaking of which, it may seem nice to instant recruit units then have them replenish over time, but this is actually pretty bad, especially early on, for a number of reasons. For starters, you can't go out with the armor instantly since all the units will be low HP, so you will end up sat for a number of turns anyway. On top of this, you are also paying upkeep on these recruited units whilst you sit there replenishing, so the army is costing you money whilst making you nothing. And having a limited capacity of units to recruit means it can be a nightmare building up armies since you have to wait for unit capacity to fill up. And on some of those army buildings, the cycles really take a hot minute. Aside from his campaign, his army is also one of the weakest, or at least the hardest to use in the game. You have extremely limited options for ranged units, so are forced to advance on enemies. Combine this with your low armor, and you'll be getting picked off on the approach and be able to do precisely nothing about it due to your slow speed. Once you actually do make contact, you're not that bad, but getting to that point of making contact can be a slow and painful process. If you're not against a lot of ranged units, then it's not so bad, but otherwise you're in for a struggle. Overall, NURGLE is just in a bit of a rough spot and needs a little pick-me-up. Looks like they went a little bit too hard on the stinkiest faction in the game. In 7th place, we have the Demons of Chaos. I had high hopes for our boy Daniel, or Yuri, or whatever else you want to call him. I saw him as the best of all the Chaos worlds, as you could steal mechanics and units and play Chaos truly how you want to. While that may be true in some aspects, in others he just feels very underwhelming, and a little like a jack of all trades and a master of none. The mechanics for the campaign are pretty lackluster. It's fun to build your demon the first time, but after that you're essentially just gaining a bunch of items that gradually give him power spikes that don't even really compare to most of the other demon lords in the end. The mechanics you steal from other factions are only half-baked and end up being a little weak, since you can't make full use of any of them, and it all ends up feeling a little bit like a gimmick. The army recruitment is really the only place they commit fully to being undivided, since you can recruit pretty much everything from the 4 rosters with a few minor exceptions. Can't really complain about them too much in battle since you get all the choice from the full Chaos roster, but it isn't enough to drag them from their slightly rough place in the campaign. Coming in 6th place, we have SLAANESH, the Prince of Excess, more like the Prince of Excessive Micro. SLAANESH is of course a powerful faction, but it just doesn't stack up to the levels of power the higher factions have. For a start, his campaign mechanics are a little less impactful than most, especially when comparing them to the other factions, whereas the currencies in the other Chaos branches can be spent to give you a massive boost in power or severely hamper your enemies, SLAANESH's instead lets you spread cults across the world. or buff your own settlements. The Disciple armies are nice, but they're not enough as they do eventually die off, and once they do, your armies will be no stronger than they were before. The ability to seduce enemy factions into becoming your vassals is another mechanic that seems cool, but is actually pretty weak. Vassals will give you money unless they die, which they likely will due to their vassalage review and the immense repercussions that brings. The saving grace mechanic is the seduction of enemy units to give you a boost in battle and turn some of the enemy's units against them. As for their armies, it honestly depends who you're against and how good you are at micro. If you are a god, then you're going to do a lot better, but for the average player, you have a roster that can be difficult to use to get results without a ton of casualties. The strong reliance on cav and chariots make them very mobile, but an intense faction to control. Alongside this, you can end up against an army with a lot of charge resistance later into the game, meaning all of your damage is massively reduced, leaving you with a tricky situation on your hands. Again, I want to say I don't think SLAANESH are actually that bad, but they are simply one of the worst of a very powerful lineup, so that's why I placed them this low. In 5th place, we have CATHAY. The two human races are really close together in power, but I think CATHAY are just that little bit weaker, and it's down to a number of things. They do have some pretty great campaign mechanics with the Ivory Road, allowing you to make an insane amount of money and get a hold of some seriously powerful items. The Compass also provides them with some great rotating bonuses throughout the entire campaign. Sadly though, they are let down by the Great Bastion and Harmony. The Bastion is just 3 more or less normal settlements that suffer attrition despite being on a wall with direct access to the rest of CATHAY, and while they can keep most weaker armies out, once larger armies come their way, they will go down like any other settlement. Harmony also has some issues with you being punished for any imbalance, and when everything on the faction relies on it, there's going to be imbalance at one point or another. Their army is similarly average. You have a ton of very powerful ranged units that allow them to turtle and deal an insane amount of damage from across the entire map. However, their elite front lines cannot stand up to most of the demonic factions, meaning all of those ranged units are pretty straightforward targets to get a hold of. Their balloon units are neat and cool to look at, but even weak flying units can fly on over and take them out with ease. The Dragon Lords are a nice touch, but aside from that, their lords and heroes are on the weaker side despite their powerful magical abilities. In 4th place we come to KISLEV. Honestly, I think KISLEV are so high mainly because of how easy their initial campaign is. Sure, there are a few rough spots, but no other faction in the game can grab as much land as they can in a shorter time, and aside from the rifts, it's pretty easy to hold onto and defend from hostile invaders. On top of this, they also have a bunch of campaign mechanics which give them an edge. The Motherland and Supports mechanic gives them buffs that can be constantly running later into the game, and grants them buffs for simply playing the game, eventually resulting in even more land and a second Legendary Lord. The Atamans allow them to control land better than any other faction. The only mechanic that could use some work is the Ice Court, as the training takes a very long time, and you end up waiting 6 times as long for heroes that you can still lose in a single battle or assassination attempt. In battle, they are again a pretty easy faction to play as. Pretty much all of the units early on are hybrid, so can deal as much damage from a range as they can in melee. This means you can basically just create a few lines in battle and go AFK while the enemy walks up to you and gets picked apart before meeting some fairly beefy front lines. Later on, they also get great magic, even better front lines and ranged, and of course, bears. They are pretty much the Empire of Warhammer 3, strong and fairly simple to learn how to play, and a great option for first timers. In 3rd place we have TZEENTCH. Now my initial impression of the TZEENTCH campaign wasn't exactly positive, but this is one of those that really get stronger as you get going. First of all, their campaign mechanics are incredibly strong. You are the only faction that can use some version of the underway so far in game, meaning you can get around the map and past armies in a way no other faction can. The manipulation of the winds means you will be going into most battles with tons of magical reserves, and with the spells you have access to, that spells a ton of kills and damage. And the changing of the ways basically gives you cheat codes you can get access to by spending a currency which eventually becomes quite plentiful. You can literally steal settlements from other factions and they can't really do anything about it. Now their army is admittedly not the strongest in the world, with pretty weak front lines options, but they do come with some of the strongest ranged units we've ever seen, alongside casters with the ability to carry battles without breaking a sweat. If you use the magic manipulation correctly, there are very few factions that can stand up to the ungodly number of spells you can throw out. As long as you stay on top of that, you should be unstoppable. In 2nd place we have OGRES. Quite a turnaround since the last time we saw a Day 1 DLC faction, but the OGRES are just that great if you ask me. Their campaign is excellent since you're on neither side of the Chaos conflict, so can just focus on doing whatever you want to make the most money and the biggest armies you can. Their campaigns are based around working for the highest bidder to earn as much coin as possible, whilst placing camps in strategic locations on the map. The camps allow you to recruit the most elite units in the roster, no matter where you are, so long as you are in their range. This means you have the ability to build up camps in enemy territory, use them to recruit powerful armies, and then get a load of bonuses for fighting near the camps, on top of the ability to recruit more units should you lose anything. They can also recruit armies of their own, making them nigh on impossible to get rid of. Their army is also one of the most fun to play, alongside being extremely powerful. You get a ton of large units with massive damage both in melee and from a range. They may sometimes be a little tough to play with such small numbers, but their immense power and rapid damage output easily outweigh this. They may not be as fancy as some of the other factions, but their simplicity does not lower their efficacy one bit. If you're looking for big power, big fun, and big boys, then look no further than the Ogres. Of course, in first place, we have KHORNE. KHORNE really does live up to his name as the god of blood and destruction, as his faction is one that is very difficult to stop once they get going. They may be one of the simpler factions in campaign and battle, with few real ranged troops and no magic alongside mechanics that are essentially battle all the time and you'll get rewards. But that simplicity is where they find their strength. The constant battling and rewards from it allow you to race settlement after settlement and wipe out enemy armies several times a turn, and if you're manually fighting when doing this, you can essentially keep it going forever, as you can minimise casualties so hit every battle pretty much fresh. The buffs you gain from continuous battling just feed even further into this playstyle, allowing armies to move further, become cheaper to maintain, and recruit faster, adding up to stacks that are very tough to stop. Alongside this, they also start in a very powerful location. The Chaos Wastes are a hellhole for anyone who isn't demonic. But for Scarbrand, it's home sweet home baby, and gives him plenty of options to expand into, far from the reach of the empires of humankind. Of course, in this campaign, expansion isn't everything, but if you're up for it, the Chaos Wastes are yours for the taking, with very manageable resistance. And finally, the Army of KHORNE. Whilst it isn't the largest, and to be honest, it isn't even really the best, it's more than enough to get the job done versus anything the enemy can toss at you. You have great options to take out armor, great options for tanking damage, and a bunch of speedy guys to pressure the enemy and roll right over them before they can react. They are of course focused on charging forward and aggressing the enemy as hard as possible to take them out in record speed. Of course, they are vulnerable to ranged fire since they don't have much of their own, but with an army capable of moving forward this hard and fast, you should roll through their lines and get to their ranged before they can do any meaningful damage anyway. I chose to put them at the top as they are so simple yet so powerful, and they can roll through any faction in the campaign and battle, and there are very few things that can properly stop them once they're on a roll. And that concludes my ranking for every faction in Total War Warhammer 3. Just remember, we all have opinions, and yours being different to mine is totally fine. One more thank you to Yours App for partnering with the channel. I really appreciate it as their support helps make content possible and allows me to spend more time doing what I love, which is making videos for you lot. I'd also like to thank all supporters of the channel, like Dominic Schmass and Adam T, and of course Henry Tucker for their support at Down Clean Ones tier. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do it on YouTube or over on Twitch and Patreon and get shoutouts at the end of videos just like all these wonderful people. Huge thanks to our supporters, one final thank you for watching, and for now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.